Okay. I gotta plug this up. You need to put this on.
Okay.
And put it in your pocket. It's already recording.
Oh, good. I need to be recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work?
No. Put it on your. Put it. No, he left.
Walt left.
Put it right there.
Walt posted a message on Facebook here last week. It was about honeybees being cold-blooded. See that? Cold-blooded. Okay, so I did a little research, and it seems like, that's actually true, but I found an article that talked about heater bees. Has any of you heard about heater bees? You know what heater bee is? You know what heater bee is? Okay, it seems like that if you look at your queen patterns, occasionally you'll have these random cells that seem to be strategically placed through your brood. It seems like somebody has done research and proven that bees will actually create heat by dislocating their wings and generating heat that way, and they will actually insert themselves in these randomly placed cells in the brood chamber to keep the brood warm. So I didn't know that. I was wondering if any of you all have heard that before. Is that a old wives' tale, or is that really true? It's true? Okay, good. We all learned something today. Our last presentation today is a friend of mine. I guess he's a friend of mine. This gentleman rescues more bees in the Charleston Tri-County area than anybody I've ever seen. He's on a moment's notice, and Charleston area Beekeepers has a swarm list, and when we get...
I'm sorry.
Okay, just speak louder.
We get an email from a citizen said we have a swarm hanging in the tree. They'll post it on our website. We immediately send it out to the swarm list, which is about 40 people. James is like the first one to call, and first come, first served to the swarms, and he also handles all the extractions from the houses and you name it. And he's really excellent at it. He is also the owner of Strut Pig Distillery in North Charleston. And so that's another good place for you to visit when you're down there next year. And, or this year, I'm sorry, yeah, this year. So, Mr. James Craig is going to talk about his experiences with extracting swarms, catching swarms, and basically dealing with all the rest of the people on the swarm list that don't get swarms.
All right, thanks. So with that, and trying to follow this last presenter, I wish I'd learned a little bit more about comedy, because I'll never be able to hold a candle to this. And this was supposed to be a technical presentation, but I found this and I changed tack. And of course, when you're doing this at home and you think you've got your presentation down the way you want to do it, and you come here and nothing looks like it does at home, all of a sudden you're wondering if anything's going to play. Well, it doesn't. So, but we've done some workarounds, and I just found this, and I think it's a marvelous way for people to kind of end up your afternoon if I can make it work. And if not, well, I gave it a good try. You should find out what Tansitsi vacilla is all about. No sound.
You'll have to cut the microphone off.
Go ahead.
It
Right.
interferes.
Oh, I need to turn it off.
Yeah, you have to cut the microphone off.
That's technical. Okay.
Is it off?
Yes. Okay. For the fun of it, just to kind of jazz you up here, or not.
Or not. Go ahead. Just do it.
Yeah.
Play it.
We'll see. That's a shame.
It's still on pause.
Is it?
Yeah. No. There we go.
You know what? Let me just stop this for just a second, because it's just. What I like to do is unplug that thing, turn this thing on. Cynthia, am I working here?
Are you going to talk or are you going to play the video?
I'll just use your PC here for a second if I could, just hold it up to your speakers. So if I just take the sound off of that thing,
Yeah, it's not going to work.
and if this doesn't work, it won't work at all.
Yeah. You don't have me turn this back on.
I might have figured that out.
Oh, it's on.
All right, so if it doesn't work, it's fine. It doesn't work.
I'll turn the mic down.
Anybody else wants to sing? This is a great thing. Tansici Basella. That's dancing bees. And I don't know what language that is. It's probably not material. But if you can pull this up when you get home, write this down, write down this title up here. And when you get home, just Google that, or Bing it, or whatever the term is these days. And you'll see that this is, oh, well, whatever. You'll see how much fun this is. This guy has captured this bee cleaning itself and has put this to music and to voice, and it's just tremendous. Nah.
I don't hear it.
I don't hear it. Tancicivcela. And whatever that language is, it stands for dancing bees. Let's just move on. So. Okay, so like I said, this presentation was originally meant to be technical, and it was titled My Thoughts on Swarm Control and Honeybee Relocations, and I just changed my mind. I didn't think that would be that much more fun than having a lighthearted discussion with people about a little bit about swarm control, but a little bit about catching bees and moving bees. So it won't be too technical this afternoon. There's some things that I believe, and so there's some things that I know, and there are many things that I believe I know. And as we all feel, it's predicated on the understanding if you ask 10 beekeepers, you probably get 12 answers. And if there's only one way to be a beekeeper, then why are there so many books? I'm a journeyman beekeeper. As of 2015, I decided I'd go to Clemson. That was my first conference. And I didn't get to take the formal test. I studied the materials, which were online at the time, and I passed the test with a big 87. So that's not to say I'm smart, but I'm lucky. And I'm in my fourth year as a beekeeper, and I still am trying to figure it out. There's so much to know, like how to operate this thing. My neighbor started me on bees. He was the expert, and with his help, we lost our bees pretty quickly. So I had the book he'd loaned me, the ABCs and the XYZs of beekeeping, and a lot of YouTube, Fat Bee Man, and you know what I mean. So I said I was ready to do it again, and I went to Hilton Head and I bought 2 nukes from David Arnall. And I brought, that was in 2013 in June, and I brought them back, and 2 weeks later I'd lost one to Hive Beetles. I called David and I said, David, I think I have zombie flies. And he might not remember that if he's still here, but I know he thought I was nuts. But y'all, I knew I was in trouble. You remember. And I knew I was in trouble. This is going to be a really expensive hobby for me. So it's important and fortunate for me that I found the Charleston Area Beekeepers Club that Debbie Fisher and Larry Haig had started a few years before that. And in early 2014, I started attending some of their meetings, and later signed up for the swarm team. Pretty soon after that, actually, because I figured if I couldn't raise bees, I'd try catching them. It turns out I'm pretty good at catching bees. So in 2014, I did 15 relocations the rest of that summer. And then in 2015, I moved 61 extractions out of places that they shouldn't be in Charleston and gave them away to local beekeepers. And I love doing that. That's part of the fun for me and the extension to the hobby of beekeeping that I find, well, not the most challenging, but it has its own rewards as well as the challenges. And I don't wear the same gear that you see there today. In fact, I hardly wear anything anymore. This is my little bee yard. This is October. It's a warm day. You can see the bees are bearding up. This is post-extraction October. They're still got goldenrod flow going on. And you can see that they're packed. I usually run this multiple brood configurations. 2 to 3 brood boxes in a medium, I guess, is about the equivalent of 2 deeps. And I keep these 7 colonies fortunately now since 2014, and maybe a couple of nukes that I'll put together to give away from hives that I pull out. We all know this little poem. It's a fun one for me, although I was catching bees in December this past year, not swarms necessarily, but I assume that all honeybees want to swarm. And so I know that that's usually in the spring, but not always. We're certainly looking for them to do that here soon as the primary nectar flow kicks in hard. And it's a normal sign of a productive, a strong colony. It's great for the bees to increase their numbers in the environment and improve the genetic diversity and all those good things. Unfortunately, it conflicts with the usual hobbyist beekeeper's goal, which is honey crops. And you've got this decrease in the parent population. You've got this brood rearing hiccup that occurs when the bees swarm. Yeah, we could throw in supersedure as well. It's going to cause a hiccup. And that's going to decrease your honey crop for that season. And it can sure be a problem for your neighbors, especially if you live in an urban or suburban neighborhood type of thing, and your bees are swarming, and maybe some non-beekeepers like to see that, and they're excited by this great number of bees swarming in the air. But I think most people are a little bit frightened by it, and if they know you're the neighbor, they're a little bit more annoyed that you're the guy that did it. So for a lot of reasons, it makes sense that we try to manage that swarming urge and be better beekeepers for that. Unfortunately, for most of you beekeepers, the first sign that you have an impending swarm is going into your box in the spring and finding queen cells with eggs or larvae in them. And that's usually a little bit too late. And we know these pre-swarm behaviors occur. It's a multiple stimuli type of thing that causes the bees to initiate the process, as I believe it to be. And it's the number of bees in relation to the size of the hive. It's not necessarily strong colonies, in my opinion, but they're crowded ones. There's just no room to expand in the colony. And so you get this spring buildup. You've got brood exploding in your box. You've got nectar being stored in all the open cells. There are no cells for the queen to lay. It's just getting crowded in there. And if it's too crowded, then certainly it can be a little bit more difficult for the worker bees to detect the queen pheromone, the queen mandibular pheromone. I won't be able to say that again. But the dilution of that, whether she's an aged queen or you just got too many bees, is that it can trigger the workers to begin preparations for swarming or for supersedure in the colony. They may not know the difference, who knows. But it's a very busy time. You've got the queen cups, which I think of as insurance, and they're always there. Now queen cells, because you've got eggs and larvae in them. And she's doing her best to lay things, and mostly it's drone brood out on the periphery of the combs. A very busy attitude inside there. The workers are agitated with what's going on in the colony. It's crowded. The queen now gets on a diet. She slims down so she's able to fly a little bit better. Foraging decreases. You've got scouting increasing by the bees. They're basically hanging out on the porch trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And queen cells get capped at about the 8th day. And that signals the workers that it's about time for 50 to 70% of your colony to take off and find a new house. And there's all this dancing that goes on in here, the waggling and the whirring that occurs in the colonies. We know bees are deaf and they don't really use verbal language to communicate, but they do dancing and sharing information and make requests of their sisters to get things done. So there are a couple of these dances that you probably already know about, the Waggle Dance and the Whir Dance. And I find those to be constant reminders to me that something bad's happening in my hive at this time of year. The Waggle Dance, of course, typically indicating the distance and direction of the food sources on a normal basis. But in this case, I think it's fair to say that the bees are indicating the direction and the distance to their new home. And I have an opinion that this scouting takes place before they swarm. Certainly it happens after the swarm leaves when they're in cluster in some bush or a tree. But who's to say that they haven't already been pre-scouting for a new place to live? And the Whir Dance, that's the one that motivates the colony to leave. And there's this really tonal change in the quality of the sounds of the hive, at least the two that I've heard in doing this. And they're running around in zigzags, they're whirring their wings and increasing the noise level in the colony and shaking their little bodies all over the place. Sorry, that's body. Fix that later. So the control methods, that's kind of back to the point, that we want to implement are designed to change that, to disrupt that process. And it's in their simplest forms to me, there are just three elements to swarm control or swarm prevention. And that's you've got the queen, you've got brood, and you've got flying bees. And what we need to do is separate just one of those from the other two elements. And we can do a pretty good job of preparing for this time of year. So these are the kinds of things. You open up your hive and you find something like this inside, and you go, what the heck's going on in here? Well, I don't know that it's necessarily a sign of imminent swarming, but are they cups or cells, you ask yourself, and you probably have an opinion about this. And they're common, the cups are really common in my hives, except in the winter. You'll probably see them, it's insurance to me. The bees build them, they tear them down when they don't need them, they may repurpose the wax for drone comb, or they may just find that it's not a convenient spot in the hive and they want to move them to another place in case they do need to use them. And cups become cells when you have an egg or a larvae developing inside, and the worker bees begin to extend the size of that cell, make it bigger, because they're feeding that egg larvae with royal jelly. It's getting bigger than the other bees are. And of course after that, well, the old queen's expendable. I would think that swarming is the preferred method for a colony to reproduce itself and or create a new queen, and supersedure is more of a backup process. That's, again, the way I think about it. But in either case, they've decided that the old queen is expendable, and if she insists on monkeying around with the process and they can't change her opinion by balling her away from the source, then they'll often terminate her early. So here you are again with this brood hiccup, this month or more in between eggs and bees and honey production. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to be good for this season's honey, that's for sure. Interesting, in this slide over here, you'll see the varroa mite sitting on the back of that worker. So I believe that if a cell is capped, something is about to happen. And either way, likely it should not if it's a supersedure, and cannot if it's a swarm be prevented or interrupted. And the popular literature says that, and this is a perfect textbook case here, that supersedure cells usually hang off the face of the brood comb. And you can see here that you've got the probably new eggs in here. The bees emerged right out of the middle of that brood comb. But I would say, or that brood nest, and I would say to you that bees are going to pick where they want these cells to be. So if it happens to be in the middle of the frame, great. But it's going to be based on where they find the youngest worker brood, that 1 to 2 day old larvae that they want to develop into the new queen. And that could be along the upper bar of your frame. It could be along the bottoms of the frames. It's going to be in an area that's convenient to them. I've read that not only could they be above the fringe of the brood nest, but they could be in the pollen feed line area, or even in the nectar storage area. Take that for what it's worth, but I would say that they probably are looking for a place that's not as well traveled by the old queen. Try to keep her out of that area as much as they can until the new queen is ready to emerge. So the differences to me are that when supersedure is endorsed. Essentially, all these queen rearing cups are going to be populated at about the same time. They may use the same queen rearing cups for swarming or for supersedure, which makes it a little bit difficult to know which one is which. But if you look at a frame where they're all populated at about the same time, I'd say we're probably leaning more toward a supersedure process as opposed to a situation where the swarm cells built along the same queen rearing cups now are trailing off into the interior of the brood nest. So because they're often built on the same queen rearing cups, the way I try to tell the difference is if all of these cells have been grouped together in a tight little group, and maybe they're out on the fringe or on the edges of the brood nest, and they were all populated about the same time, then I'm thinking probably I have a supersedure process going on. If, in addition to that, perhaps those cells are trailing into the interior of the brood nest, and maybe they're 2 weeks trailing into it rather than a week, then I probably am looking at a swarming process that's been initiated. So even though the cells look about the same, the differences are in the patterns and in the stages of development. So it's important that you investigate these things and then evaluate what you see, because in the end there's only going to be one big mama in the nest. So staying with the popular literature for a second, this is because I'm using multiple brood nests, and this is something that I'm sure some of you do too. Swarm cells usually found hanging off the bottom of the upper frames, or the frames on the upper box. It's really easy to crack that propolis seal on the box and tilt it up and examine the bottom of those frames to see if you have cells hanging off the bottom without going into your brood nest, especially right now when it could be cold, and splitting things up. It's also a chance for me to look down into the bottom brood nest and see what's going on. If it's empty, I know I've got some opportunities coming up for some hive body manipulations and other methods that I can employ to change their mind without, again, having to go into the brood nest too early when the weather is not as stable as you might want it to be. So in the sketch that you see here, out here on the edge, this represents the original queen cups that were put out there in advance for insurance. They don't know yet whether they need to supersede or they need to swarm. And then you've got these backup swarm cells that are trailing into the interior of the brood nest. And again, they're going to stretch out in age. And you've got these cells here in the middle they just confuse the dickens out of me. But I try to remember that if all the cells are about the same age and they're tightly grouped together, then it's probably going to be a supersedure. So I'm going to be trying to find that queen. And if there's trailing off into the middle of the nest, then I'm thinking about a swarm that's about to happen. So cups are for insurance. Cells are populated. A cell found in the middle of the frame is not always a supersedure cell. And a cell hanging off the bottom of the frame is not always a swarm cell. So can we control the urge? Well, if we do, we'll expect a little better honey crop, and a stronger colony, more productive bees, a better beekeeping experience, that's for certain. But if there's a magical aspect to beekeeping, it's swarm control. How do you keep them from doing it? I try my preparations before the first significant flow occurs on the coast. That's different from where you live. So you need to use resources and try to start early. So if you can predict what it's going to be like 4 weeks early, and you've got resources, here's one I put in here that pollen.com is a good source. This happens to be from my zip code. But you can go online and find pollen.com and plug in your zip code. And just one more resource to help you determine which plants are flowering, what trees are flowering, and get an idea of whether the bees are bringing in nectar. And you can see from this 30-day historic level here and around the Mount Pleasant area, spring is here. We're coming into an early spring. Your local beekeepers associations will have the beekeeper calendars and the charts that tell you when to expect things to bloom. The South Carolina Beekeepers website has similar things like that too. So is it the prime directive? I don't know. I think swarming might be a little bit more than just reproduction of colonies. Just an opinion I'm forming here in my 4th year. And not just for production, but maybe there's an element of exploration that the bees are undergoing here. It makes sense to me that bees that swarm would be aware of swarms emanating from the parent colony in previous years and their location, and they would also be aware of where good forage would be found and protected nesting sites would be found, and bees would preferentially choose those. I don't know how they know to do that, but certainly I've read that there are hives that swarm so much that there's really nothing left of the parent colony, and I mean 5 or 6 swarms emanating from one colony in the article that I recently read. And the people who were working with the hives in question observed this happening. So why did these bees swarm so many times from one colony, and every one of them go off in different directions, if there's not something going on that we don't quite understand? It's just a curious thing to think about. My wife says I never tell the end of the story, so there I am again. It's just another example of that same source of pollen.com. You can get a current allergy report, which may help those of you who have allergies, but also tell you what the top trees that are flowering in your area would be, and what you can expect for the next day or so. Okay, again, my opinion, there's no wrong or right way to control swarms. And we've talked off and on today. Some of the things that Tom brought up today were perfect. I won't have to talk about them again. But you're really just managing this process that mimics the natural urge of the bees to swarm. We're trying to fool the bees and keep them there. And so each of these methods that I'm going to run through here really quickly are designed to do that in some way. And each has its own merits. You can find all sorts of resources online that show you how to hold a queen and what kind of scissors to buy and which wing to clip. And I think it has some merit. If your bees are going to swarm, she's not going to go very far, that's for certain. She may crawl back up underneath the colony or over in a bush. With a cluster of bees, you've got yourself a new hive. I don't know that they necessarily appreciate you putting her back in the parent colony at this point, but it's certainly one thing you can do that's effective, and if you use that in addition to some other things, it could help prevent swarming. I've tried cutting queen cells from colonies. You have to start early on that one. And if you have more than a couple of hives, then you're spending a lot of time. If you figure you're going to start this about a month ahead of time and start looking for these in your colony, and then go in there every 7 to 9 days and cut these queen cells out. And Lord, please don't forget one that was over there on the side frame, that little nubbin that was hidden from you, and they swarm anyway. And if you've got more than a couple of hives, how much time do you have to go in there and do this? You can remove frames from brood and bees and stores, and you can use them to equalize your weak colonies with your strong colonies. That's certainly a good way to do it. 2 to 4 frames makes a big difference in a weak colony. You can do the splits like Tom was talking about this morning and make nucleus hives out of them. There are a lot of different names for those. It's just like you said, just shaking nurse bees and moving some brood, young brood, and perhaps the queen. If you do that, you'll get rid of an aging queen on top of that. You can super up as well. That's another thing. I have a point about excluders I want to bring at this juncture. All of these things will relieve congestion. And you can use them in combination. That's fine too, I think. I don't know about excluders in this case. I also read recently that queen excluders were a good way to permanently prevent your bees from swarming. And I think chances are we do more damage than we do any help. For example, you've got a virgin queen in your hive. She gets out anyway because she's got a skinny abdomen, and the bees swarm. You've got a pet queen. She can't get through the excluder. She can't get mated. You got drone bees that are sitting in the excluder and clogging it up, so the traffic jam exists anyway. And you've got worker bees that are coming back and forth, bringing in pollen, scraping their pollen baskets, and maybe there's some nutritional issues involved. I'm not a big fan of queen excluders. Requeening early and every year is seen as a way to help manage swarms. It can be hard to get good queens early in the season, and I think that's in part why some beekeepers will do that late in the season after the primary flow is completed. You're probably going to get a good strong queen going into the spring next year, and she's not as likely to swarm because she's young. The bees will be happy to have her there. And you can put empty combs in the brood nest, and again, you can soup her up and give them space that way. This is a sort of tried and true method. I've done this one myself. The common wisdom is that the bees move up in the wintertime. They're following their food stores, so they're working up into that honey dome. So all you got to do is reverse the boxes. You know, you've got, here's my for coloring here, that's my honey dome there at the top, and here's my brood in cluster coming out of the winter. And so you just take the bottom box and you put it on the top. And then you put the brood in the bottom, they all move back up. But you still have this honey dome sitting here. And it sounds reasonable, but there's a guy named Walt Wright that says, and he's done a lot of work. It's another good source for you to read. He's done a lot of work on swarm prevention, and he says that reversing the boxes is not always a good idea, and it's not always necessary to do it. When you cut the bees off from the honey dome, as you would with these bees in the top, you isolate them from the queen and everything else that's going on in the bottom. And it may induce them to create a new queen and supersede or swarm. He suggests that you equalize your hives in the fall, get your bees spread out between the supers, and not necessarily do this at all. That if you do a proper job in the fall before they go into winter, then they'll take care of the process themselves. Yes, they'll move up as the late winter comes on, but they'll also move back down by themselves and fill up that space. And I guess the other thing that would hurt is if you happen to move them too soon and you have a small cluster sitting up here in this top box and a large cluster down here in the bottom box, and you had cold weather and you either chill or kill off this cluster that you have in the top. This is what I'm going to do this year, if I need to do them. So I want to wait for some warm days and nights. I want to move quickly, because if you do this in the summertime, you got 90 degrees outside and you got a cluster inside of 95 degrees. It's not a big deal, but if you do that early in the year, any significant temperature difference can chill your brood pretty quickly. So you got to have all your equipment ready. You need to move quickly. Drawn comb, extra boxes, and so forth. But this is my hive. If this works, this was also changed on the fly. And I'll speak just down here to this piece about checkerboarding honey supers. This stands for empty, full, empty, full, empty, full, empty, full. I have 8 frames. And then if I'm lucky enough and I've got a second honey super left over, then I'd have full, empty, full, empty, full, empty, full, empty. So they're staggered. And that helps distribute the food stores. And I usually provide a top entrance if I have more than 2 honey supers, to give the bees a way to get in and out of the colony without tracking up the brood nest and creating a traffic jam down in the lower boxes. There's enough going on down there anyway. So let's see if this will work. So I'm going to take off my honey super and set it aside. And I can see already this doesn't quite work. This second box up here was supposed to be removed and set to the side. These are my bees. These are my empty broods down here, because I expect them to have moved up during the winter. So I'm going to take out some empty frames from the center of the bottom box, And we'll take bees where I expect them to be out of the top box, and we'll put them in the center below. And we'll push all these bees that were left in the top box together so that I've got my brood stacked on top of each other and I've got them warm. And then I'll bracket them with the empty frames. And the point is that the bees on the bottom and the bees on the top now have room to spread out to the sides. I've relieved congestion. They've got work to do. You can use this as a way to cycle out some of your old brood comb by using an empty foundation with or without a starter strip. And my understanding is that unlike in a honey super, if you do this in your brood box, they'll still maintain their bee space and not build out too far beyond the face of the frame. Whereas if you do that in your honey supers, you probably know people, you may do it yourself, where you're running a 10 frame, but you only have 9 frames in your honey super, or you're running 8s and you're only running 7, so you get fatter honey frames when you go to extract. That won't happen, I don't believe it will happen, I'll tell you later, if you do that in your brood chambers. And up here you can see what I did as far as checkerboarding my honey super or supers. I'll do the same thing. I'll be empty, full, empty, full, empty, full. And if I have a second one, I'll just reverse that. Full, empty, full, empty. So again, the bees won't have to, the worker bees will have plenty of space to store nectar and develop honey stores. These folks down here will have plenty to do raising brood. Two guys, I want to just mention to you that I've found quite interesting. Tim Ives beekeeping. If you've not looked at Tim Ives' beekeeping method, he has a premise that a queen can only lay so many eggs in a season. And that's roughly equivalent to about 2.5 deeps worth. And that all happens before the nectar season comes to a close and the bees begin to contract and prepare for the winter. So what Tim does is he supers with drawn comb. And he puts, he's known as tower hives because of the height of his colonies. But he'll super up with drawn comb and put a new super on with open foundation under the stack as it gets higher. And he does that so that the queen doesn't move up in there and lay eggs. He's found in doing this kind of method that he gets, he's doing this in Indiana, by the way, and he's starting this in the middle of March. His average winter losses have gone from 50% down to 8% using this method of supering up. And you can imagine Indiana didn't have as long a season. That first slide was in May. This is July. He gets more extractions. He gets more supers per hive. It's been a better experience for him. It makes me wish I'd started with deeps instead of all mediums, but I'm getting older. He also says that bees do a finite number of tasks, and beekeepers do an infinite number of things to bees. And the better you understand the difference, the better your beekeeping experience will be. Check him out. The other guy is Walt Wright, who I mentioned before. He's a champion to me. He thinks the bees are motivated by survival, and that we see but we don't necessarily observe or in a way ask the bees what to do or why they do what they do. And he's concentrated most of his investigations on swarming and how to prevent them and how they relate to these objectives: the survival of an existing colony and generating reproductive swarms. He thinks that the elements of congestion in a hive are deliberate steps that the bees take. And it's not the other way around. It doesn't happen by accident. The literature says that congestion is the cause, and he says that that's backwards. Okay, that's enough about that. You mess with bees, you're going to get stung. And I love chasing bees. I've got friends that examine me to see how many stings and laugh at the number of stings I take, but that's part of the fun. If you're going to chase bees, you need to have certain equipment available to you, and you need to be ready to go, especially when you get a swarm call. You all know swarms can be there and gone before you get there. I got a call last summer. This is the College of Charleston's new dormitory going up at the foot of the Ravenel Bridge in Charleston. Project manager was trying to get the roof laid, and the workers wouldn't do the job because a colony of bees had swarmed and landed on the mechanical building. Pretty simple. I said, no, I'll come get him. And so 8 stairs, construction stairs, and flights of stairs, and my bee vac, little bucket vac, and squirt bottle of honey, water, and a little queen clip in my pocket. And I didn't have any power when I got up there, so I wasn't able to change this thing. So, you know, bees are, in this case, bees are very docile in my experience. Most of the time, if you're very careful and very slow, and this is what I did in this example, you just reach under them and catch them in your hands, and you just dump a few handfuls inside the, in that case, a 5-frame nuke. And you're looking all the time for the queen. And when you see her, you clip her with your little queen clip, and then it's game over. You can put that clip inside, which is what I did in this case, and come back at dusk and stuff a rag in the front of it and carry the whole box home. And it was probably 30 minutes of time to get this colony. It was about 4 pounds of bees. There are all sorts of props that you can use to help you catch swarms. You can keep it pretty simple. Most of the calls I've gotten are for extractions and cutouts, as they're called, and many of them are in pretty unusual places. This is a backflow preventer. It's a commercial plumbing device that you'll see outside the businesses, and the technicians have to go in once a year and examine these. And so the bees have built underneath this fiberglass cover, and it's all this wonky comb that had to be removed. And when I flipped over the cover, I realized this was going to take a while to get this cleaned out. So I asked the owner of the business if it would be all right if I just brought this back to him when I got done. So that's what I carried home that afternoon with all the bees underneath it. It was a perfect way to transport. A lot of us make do. Tammy Enright called me. She was in Savannah. My bees had swarmed. Could I go down there and take a look? So this is what I found in front of her business. And that was a big observation hive. If you're still here, Tammy, I often meant to ask you that. Okay. But they've taken up temporary residence underneath the picnic table. And again, I was lucky to catch the queen and borrowed some of Tammy's equipment. I didn't have a hive body, but I took her hive body and some empty frames and a solid bottom board and a queen excluder, which I'll talk about just in a second. And found the queen, put her in the box, and then just settled down to watch. Then march into the hive. And as this passerby came by, I said, "Are you crazy? Can I take your picture?" And so I asked him to send me the picture of watching the bees. This is instructive for a couple of reasons. One, to demonstrate how crazy I am, and the other is the tools that I commonly will have available for catching swarms really don't involve more than a box to put them in, something to catch the queen in. I carry a couple of these clips with me. A bee brush, I don't like those, and the bees don't either. You'll definitely get stung if you brush bees, or I will. My sugar spray, I had a smoker and a way to light it, but don't need it. And just in case they get testy, there's my bee veil hiding back behind the inner cover. But most of the time you don't need it. So I don't like to wear protection. The best use for the excluder, by the way, I found is to put that between the catch box and the solid bottom board. And I do that so that when I get them where I'm going, it reduces absconding. Many of the swarms that you catch will abscond, especially if you don't rehive them on their own comb. And so how are you going to ensure that you keep them there long enough for the queen to start laying and call that her new home? And the queen excluder seems to work for me. I found that once I get them home and set them up on screen bottom board, whatever you're using, solid bottom board, and allow the worker bees room to get out and forage. And if you do stack some brush or leaves or some twigs there to give them something to orient to, they'll come back and forth, and mama can't get out to go with them. And I'll leave that there in place sometimes up to 3 days before I remove the excluder. You can imagine this side's here, what would have been, this was a porch a few neighborhoods over. Bees had been in there for a couple of months and they didn't think too much about it. I put this in here to show what could have happened next year with no insulation inside there. That would have been a really fun hive to extract. I use the bee vacuums. I find that the bee vacuums help reduce the number of bees, kind of evens up the playing field, and or evens up the odds, levels the playing field, and I'm much better able to spot the queen. I'll use smoke to drive the bees off the comb so that I can more easily cut it, and then you'll see rubber bands on my wrist. I'm cutting comb and framing it into empty frames and putting that in a brood box so that they have their own comb to work and will accept it more readily. But usually I find that the queen's about the last bee to come out of there. I've gotten it down to 100, 150 bees, and there she is, poking her head out. You can make these bee vacuums pretty simply, $30 in 2 5-gallon buckets and a little bit of shop vac hose, and you've got a nice bee vac. Mine happens to have a little ring here to help reduce or increase the vacuum. And I've copied plans for the Bushkill bee vac, which you can find online, the Colorado bee vac, which I currently use because I have multiple catch boxes that I can use for that. I have stopped using the headlamp when I do this. They ping off of you pretty good if you do that. And I like doing it in the evening, so I do use a lot of light. I find that I catch most of the field bees that way. If you're going to go out and catch these, that's something to consider. You never know where you're going to find them. This little video speaks to Old Navy base in Charleston. They were going to move the old Seamen's Chapel down there and asked if I could come evaluate what they saw going in and out of the corner. I said, sure, I can come get those for you. It won't take much for me to do if I can get this to pop up. And this is what I found. This was 16 comb layers thick and went from the top plate almost to the bottom. They'd been there a while. And if you look at this, you can see old brooding here, old comb, crystallized honey stores up at the top. And guys, this is it's probably 6 feet long, but it's like eating an elephant. You take one bit at a time and just keep working your way up, and hope you don't run out of space to put root comb. That's what you leave it like. These folks had seen bees for 3 years. It was in the porch floor of an old house downtown Charleston. This is instructive because you're going to find bees in places that you don't necessarily want to go, but you want to be safe when you're up there working it. So the bees were in this floor, and once I got this all put together, this was a challenge in and of itself. I took a sawzall and cut that flooring out, and this comb extended back up underneath the floor about 30, as long as my arm is, 33 inches long. That takes a while to get out of there. Just more examples of it. I think this point is to be taken. Here's another porch, another area. Bees had started here, moved down, the porch was underneath it, they're on the ceiling. They'd moved to the right till they ran out of room, and then they started moving to the left, and the homeowners have been after me from December until March to get those bees out. I used extension ladders and a walk board in between that, and just so you know, it's not as dangerous as my girlfriend Jean thinks it is. I'm clipped in, I've got a rope or a chain behind me so that if I fall, everything else falls with me. But the thing is, they just need a different home, and homeowners don't know this, and they're so apt to treat the problem as they see it with insecticides called the exterminator. I see it as an opportunity to place bees in a safer place, that they'll be happier. Definitely don't need to have tier of heights when you catch bees. The homeowner had said the bees were in his soffit next to his chimney, second floor. So I've got my 32-foot extension ladder to find out they're 50 feet up on the soffit next to the chimney. That's me up there tied in with a bowline onto the top of the ladder. My Eagle Scout son says, "Oh, Dad, we can lash these two ladders together with rope and duct tape." This is Father's Day last summer. Thanks, son. Anyway, nobody got hurt. Bees got out. And this is a beautiful view of Charleston at 85 feet. This is the tallest one I've removed. This was May last year. You can see it's about 6:45 in the afternoon. That's me up here on the JLG. And the bees have taken up residence inside the soffit of the then being developed Hilton Hotel Complex at King Street and Spring Street downtown. And of course, all work had stopped. So the guy says, "Do you know how to drive one of these?" And I'm, "Sure, yeah." He comes over, you push that button. "Oh, that's the pedal, okay." So after back and forth swinging like a grapevine, I ended up in the right place and found these bees in here. They've been here for a couple of months, and you just keep cutting away at the soffit material and the waterproofing material. And after moving about 6 or 7 maps of the United States, you end up with 2 buckets of 2 5-gallon buckets, about half full of bees. Now these bees were slated to go to a beekeeper who didn't show up. So I had my catch box and no empty foundation, so I was cutting comb in anticipation of the beekeeper showing up. Only to find out that I just had to pour the bees on top of it, and then when I got home, they're not pleasant. And you notice the time here is like 9:20. I had to then frame all this and get the bees in a proper setting. But I still like giving the bees away to locals. This one is recent. Adrian Lucier is here. I gave these bees to him the other day. He actually went with me and helped remove these. It's an example of how you want to start and finish. One side or the other. You pick them. But you'll notice here that this little corner is pretty empty and devoid of bees. When I get through with it, they're all in this corner, and that's where I find the queen. The whole time I'm cutting this out. And Adrian, what I get stung once with my head up in there with no gear on, and it happened right as I got started, but I'm up in there with my head and my eyeglasses on trying to find the queen. And so, people say it's a dangerous kind of thing, and yeah, you take your chances, but I find that if you're gentle and you're purposeful and you're respectful, and bees don't know what the heck's going on anyway. There's this guy here with this vacuum sucking us off. They don't want to sting you. But I found the queen in that corner, and there she is, nice big fat red queen. Adrian tells me today that they're just going gangbusters at home in Somerville. And again, you try to leave things better than you find them. And then maybe finally, this is kind of how I do a trap out. I do a little bit of beekeeping for the city of Charleston sometimes in terms of swarm removals. And so they had found a tree down on the peninsula that had been damaged by high winds, and the limb had split off, and the arborist and I went up in a bucket to examine it, and I said, yeah, I can get that out. I can see this entrance right here, and I can just cut this off and take this home, and it's late in the season. I'll just use a hand truck. My son and I'll get it into position, and we'll leave them there until spring when it's a proper time to relocate them. I'll take a chainsaw and cut windows in the tree trunk and, get at them the way you should instead of sticking a vacuum line up inside the opening. Well, about the time we got right there, the bees started coming out of the tree limb. And they were coming out of this opening, and they were coming out of this opening, and they were coming out of this opening. You can see already the size of this thing. So there was no way I was going to get that home. The guy says, no problem, we'll just take it home for you. So they had it on the trailer and the crane and the truck, the trailer and my pickup truck. We all headed over to Mount Pleasant. He backed into my driveway and lifted this trunk over the service lines, the electrical lines to my house, and stretched it out and leaned it up against this live oak in the side of my yard. I have ratchets strapped down to the tree. You got to really love catching bees. All right, so that's about it. There's a great video at the end of this that I can't get it to play. I'll point you to the link, and it's a great link. I've got some handouts that I was going to play the video as I pass these out, but maybe if I just divide them up, you can take them till they run out, if you were able to catch the email address or my phone number, or if you want it and you don't get one, then I'll be glad to give it, send it to you. The handout is a sheet that will help you realize the kinds of tools that I have for catching bees. And you can modify that to suit yourself, from simply catching swarms, and you can go as elaborate as I have with thermal imaging cameras and bore snake cameras to look inside the structures, and you see the point. But take it for what it's worth. Have fun doing it. The link that I wanted you to know about is some high school kids that put together a project called "Please Don't Kill My Bees." And I wish I could play this. It's the Science Rap Academy. These kids are awesome. They have this rap-oriented song about how important the bees are to us. And I encourage you to look that up on YouTube. Both of those videos are YouTube videos. The Dancing Bee and Please Don't Kill My Bee. And I appreciate that you tolerated me this long today. Or maybe we can get it. Cynthia thinks we can pull it up.
Well, I gotta figure out the sound.
I don't know how to do your
Right
sound.
here.
If you could get the sound, it's fun. I was watching Ted up here earlier, and you were playing this video behind him, and
I didn't have any sound.
couldn't get any sound.
Yeah.
But that's all right. Thank you. If you have a question, ask it. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about what you do when you're finished? Because I've had some beginning beekeepers go out and do one, and then they don't seal up the building, tree, whatever they
Yeah, the question is, what happens when you get finished? And how do you leave it better than you found it as far as the homeowner is concerned? And what I do is a combination of things. I'll scrape the comb out and leave it clean. The smell of that old comb is a huge attraction to another swarm moving in. I don't want to leave them anything physical to build on. A friend of mine, Scott Garrett, who owns Blackwood Bees, has a wonderful product, Honey Bee Gone. It's a noxious blend of chemicals. It smells pretty nice to me, but the bees don't like it. And so I will spray that area thoroughly to discourage them from coming back into it. Depending on what kind of opening I've had to make, I'll cover it with plastic, staple it on, keep the bees from re-entering the home. If it's like these examples here, I'll spray it with soapy water and then finish off with that Honey Bee Gone. But I have done things like staple plastic over the vents that go into bathrooms, because the bees love to go in through those exterior vents, for example, and most of the ones that I've been at are not made out of galvanized metal. They're the plastic with the spring in them, and they degrade over time, and that's a perfect entrance for bees. They come in through the vent, they go through those openings, they build horizontally into the floor joist or ceiling joist, depending on which way you're looking, up or down, and it's just a mess in there. So once you finish what you're doing, you need to prevent them from having access from the outside back into the interior of the home. So I'll do that. If it's underneath a porch, it's more or less just spraying with soap water or bleach, and then finishing up with the honey bee. Or you can leave it, and then they'll call you back next year to do
Two questions. My first question is, do you find when you're catching swarms or doing removals, do you find varroa mites and small hive beetles? Because those are basically wild, or feral colonies. Do you find the pests and things you're looking for them, or see them?
Yeah, the question has to do with what else do you find inside these extractions, inside the bees. And I do consider these feral hives when they've been established like that. So other than a little bit of diversity in genetics, you do find hive beetles, just like you do in your managed colonies. And just like you see them in your managed colonies, the bees have been assigned guard duty, and the hive beetles are usually concentrated in an area of the hive. I try not to vacuum them up. I don't go about trying to kill them while I'm in there. It's too busy, but I try to avoid vacuuming them up. It's a little harder to see things like varroa mites on the adult bees, and I'm not really opening up brood or even worker cells to, or brood, I mean drone or worker brood to see if they're inside the cells. I don't know so much about varroa mites and when you see them riding on the back of bees. I've read that it seems to be more prevalent. That's likely in the late winter before they begin their brood development, because they really don't have much brood development going on in a colony, so they don't have any place to go in and hide for 21 to 24 days. And they will catch a piggyback right on the I don't doubt that they seem to be everywhere. Yes, sir?
Do the owners ever expect you to report their?
One of the things that's in that little sheet that's going around is a release of liability. That's important. The question is, do the homeowners expect me to repair everything? And I don't have a construction license. I'm not a contractor. So I go into it with the expectation that I'm going to do a removal, and I'm going to do a reasonable job of cleaning up. It's going to be minimal intrusion to the home. If it's something like putting vinyl siding back on, I can do that. If it's something like putting lap side on and I have to come down a wall to remove it to get to the bees, I'll do that rather than take a saw and cut through it. But I'll do sheetrock work, and I know contractors who do other things. If they want someone to come in, I can recommend it, and they may have some time. Yes, ma'am.
You do this for the love of the bees, or is there a reasonable cost?
I do it for the love of the bees first. If it's a commercial application, I'm going to tag them every chance I get. I have homeowners who've offered money to me. I've had homeowners who have given us, Gene and myself, restaurant vouchers. I'll take it. It's fine. To me, the benefit is paying it forward to beekeepers and relocating the bees to a place where they're going to be happier in the end. And to that extent, I hope I get good karma by giving away hives to people. Good question. Certainly you can make a business out of it.
How do you deal with the honey? Because when you're removing comb, there's honey going to be dripping everywhere, and then clean up after.
I use drop cloths underneath my working space and catch the drips. I try to control that. The question is what I'll do about the honey that's dripping down when I'm cutting stores. And so you're going to get it on you. I keep a bucket of water, my cutting knife, and a rag in that so that I can clean myself up, keep my knife clean, keep the vacuum clean, keep the area where I'm working clean as I remove those stores. And I usually have two different receptacles. I've got a receptacle for kept honey and a receptacle for the comb that I can't use. It's either drone comb I'm not interested in keeping. You have a finite space, you're going to cut this comb and rubber band it into empty frames. If you use deeps, great, you got more space. If you use mediums, you have less. So I don't want any comb that I can't use. The bees will make more. So to me, it's important to get as much brood, larvae, eggs, in addition to the adult bees as I can. So to that end, I'll take the honey that I've cut and pushed to the side, and I usually bag it up in a 55-gallon commercial trash bag. And when I get home, there's a knot in the end of it, and I lay it down on the floor in the garage, and I crush it. I walk on it and snatch it all up and hang it, and then cut a hole in the corner and set my two filtration sieves, is the only one in the country, and filter the honey out for my consumption. There's a point to be taken, I think, from that comment, that you don't always know the source of the honey. And we talked a little bit today about American foul brood, and certainly you wouldn't want to introduce questionable food supplies to your bees. I'm aware of that, but in my case, I've fed some of the honey back to the bees in my yard. In part, that's why I've gotten as much off of my hives, and even though I've had to redistribute some supers to my hives last year, I still leave a good bit of stores on my colonies in my yard because I'm eating other people's honey. I hope that answers the question. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Ma'am, sir.